Thank you, Mr. President. It's a pleasure to see so many old friends around the table and also looking forward to develop new friendships. A real honor being here. Mr. President, it's an honor to brief the Security Council for the first time as the Special Envoy for Syria some 8 weeks into my mandate. I have taken up this task with all humility and conscious of the profound grief and suffering of the Syrian people everywhere. I am conscious of the need to end this conflict for the sake of Syria, the region, and the world. I know you all understand the scale and difficulty of my task. It is not for the lack of talent that my predecessors did not achieve more. And it will, of course, not be possible to satisfy every party on every issue. But I can promise you that I will work impartially and diligently to discharge the mandate given in Security Council Resolution 2254 to facilitate the political process. To do that will require the cooperation of all Syrian and international parties. It will require the readiness of all to deal seriously with the realities of the conflict and to work together to move things step by step in a positive direction. Mr. President, in my initial engagements, I have reminded all parties that Resolution 2254 contains all the elements required for a political solution. The resolution begins by respecting the sovereignty, unity, independence, and territorial integrity of Syria, and provides a roadmap for a truly Syrian-led and owned political process. And this is a key, because I'm convinced that the real peace process in Syria needs to be owned by the Syrians, including over half the population, Syrian women, for it to be sustainable. Resolution 2254 demands compliance with international law, stresses protection of civilians and unfettered humanitarian access, cessation of hostilities, addressing terrorism, implementing confidence-building measures, and releasing detainees and abductees. All of these are vital if we are to see Syrians moving out of conflict. It further addresses the issues of governance, a constitutional process, and UN-supervised elections. These are the means by which the Syrians and no one else should determine their future. It speaks of safe and voluntary refugee returns and of reconstruction, issues that present themselves on a major scale and require serious discussions. In short, Resolution 2254 takes a comprehensive view on the issues that need to be addressed to end the conflict and bring stability and genuine peace. Mr. President, my first and most important priority has been to engage with the Syrian government and the Syrian Negotiations Commission and seek their views and cooperation. In Damascus, I was received very well by Foreign Minister Mualem. He responded positively to my core message. He expressed interest in the success of my mission, and he welcomed my intention to return. Last week, Deputy Special Envoy Ramsey returned to Damascus and held good discussions with Deputy Foreign Minister Mikdad, reaffirming an agreement to sustain dialogue on peace in Syria on the basis of Resolution 2254, with the aim of building confidence and towards a Syrian-led and owned and UN-facilitated political process. I visited the Syrian Negotiations Commissions at their office in Riyadh and met with all components led by coordinator Nasser Hariri. I appreciated very much their positive response to my message and their commitment to engage and seek dialogue and negotiations to implement Resolution 2254. My senior advisors had follow-up discussions a few days ago with them. They affirmed their readiness for a sustained dialogue on the basis of Resolution 2254 towards a Syrian-led and owned and UN-facilitated political process. I have also appreciated the frank, practical, and constructive engagement with all international stakeholders, including visits to Moscow, Cairo, Ankara, Tehran, Paris, Berlin, Brussels, and meetings with senior officials of key countries in Geneva, at Davos, and recently in Munich. I will be in Washington on Tuesday and other capitals in due course, including London, Beirut, Amman, and Beijing. Mr. President, I have recalled to all my interlocutors, and I remind you that we are not starting from scratch. We have 12 living principles developed by the Syrians in Geneva and affirmed in Sochi. We have baskets that have formed an agreed agenda for intra-Syrian talks under UN facilitation. But beyond that, let me share 5 core thoughts with you on the way ahead. First, it is essential for me as a UN mediator and facilitator to have direct and effective engagement with the government of Syria and, of course, with the opposition. This is needed to build confidence and trust and to develop sustained dialogue with the parties. It is needed to bring the Syrians to renegotiation on the UN auspices to end the devastating conflict in the country and to make a new beginning so that Syrians can together win the peace, a peace for all Syrians. I welcome the readiness of the parties to engage with me in this regard, and I look forward to returning to Damascus in a few weeks and to seeing the Syrian negotiations commissions again after that. It is not for me here to prejudge what can be built in a deeper dialogue, but I believe there is a shared sense that battlefield developments might be winding down. Nevertheless, the conflict is far from over, and the challenge of winning the peace are staggering in scale and complexity. Large tracts of territory remain outside of government hands. ISIL is nearly defeated territorially, but experience suggests it can re-emerge. Syrians yearn to see the issue of detainees, abductees, and missing persons meaningfully addressed. Around half of Syria's pre-war population has been displaced. You know the figures: 5.6 million refugees, 6.6 million IDPs, and 80% of the Syrians are living below the poverty line, and half are unemployed. 11.7 million Syrians need humanitarian assistance. I was pleased that with the engagement of the US and Russian co-chairs of the ISSG and the facilitation of the Syrian government, we recently saw the largest single humanitarian convoy of the conflict reach 40,000 IDPs into Raqqa. Let me emphasize, Mr. President, that the UN stands ready to support a durable solution for the people of Raqqa, one that abides by core protection standards that must be coordinated with all relevant parties. Socioeconomic challenges are acute, with major challenges in service delivery, including gas shortage. Mr. President, after 8 years of war, Syrian society has undergone a profound transformation that has also dramatically impacted Syrian women. Many have assumed new responsibilities as the primary breadwinners of their families. Others have faced increased forms of violence, specifically targeting women. Syrians, men, women, and children are suffering enormously. Part of my mandate is to try and find ways to address these issues. Syria remains volatile for those who remain inside of Syria and for those who wish to return. My second point. Let me observe that I was encouraged by the recent release of 42 detainees, abductees. This was the second release operation conducted by the Russian Federation and Turkey within the framework of the Working Group on Detainees, Abductees, and Missing Persons. At the same time, we need to scale up and prioritize action on this issue, which is of immense humanitarian importance and is also an essential part of building confidence. We are intensively engaging on this issue with the parties and in key capitals. We are eager to see more meaningful progress to be unlocked in the period ahead, and we are in concrete discussions on how to attempt to do this. My third point. Beyond the formal parties, the full spectrum of the Syrian people need to be engaged and involved in the effort to build confidence and trust and search for peace. Engaging Syrians from different walks of life reminds me of what is at stake for civilians in this conflict. It reminds me of Syrians' resilience in responding to the overwhelming needs generated by this conflict and of their stake in the political process. Over the past 2 months, my team has conducted consultations with more than 200 Syrian civil society actors from inside Syria and the diaspora. I have been carefully studying the insights and reflection of these Syrians to inform my thinking and remain committed to ensuring that the broad spectrum of Syrian civic actors are heard and included in our efforts to promote sustainable peace. Mr. President, next week the Women's Advisory Board will be in Geneva. They have already been in touch to convey that there will be no sustainable peace in Syria unless all Syrians are included in shaping the future of the country. I look forward to hearing their views on how to advance the women's rights agenda and strengthening the meaningful participation of women in the political process. This brings me to my fourth point. As I deepen the dialogue with the parties, I sense a wide acceptance of the notion that convening a credible, balanced, inclusive, and viable Syrian-led and owned constitutional committee under UN auspices in Geneva can be important to revitalize the political process. It can be a door opener to a deeper dialogue and genuine negotiations. I also believe it is now well understood that a package of understandings is needed to ensure that the Syrian government and opposition are on board on essential principles of procedure to guide the work of the Constitutional Committee. It is my hope that we can finalize the rules of procedure and the composition of the committee in the near future. I will do everything possible to facilitate a credible composition, including a minimum 30% female representation. Mr. President, as we focus on developing a real Syrian-led process, we of course all acknowledge that external intervention has been a significant factor in the conflict. 5 international armies operate across Syria's land and airspace in tension or even conflict, generating daily risk for international escalation. The involvement, of course, extends beyond the military sphere to a range of other spheres as well. So this brings me to my fifth point, that I will focus on improving international dialogue and cooperation. Some challenges must be addressed urgently, or else Syria will be engulfed in renewed escalations that would have immense human cost, derail any progress on the political front, and risk regional spillover. Intensive diplomacy is on the way, but even more is needed regarding the future situation in the northeast. There, I believe, a way forward is needed that, to paraphrase the Secretary General, ensures the unity and territorial integrity of Syria and takes into account the security concerns of neighboring states while recognizing and giving voice to different components of Syria's population. Likewise, HTS advances in Idlib and escalations in the area underscore the need to uphold the fragile ceasefire arrangements for Idlib, to protect the civilians and also counter the Security Council-listed terrorist groups and foreign fighters that have been such a scourge on Syria, while also addressing the root causes and conditions in which they drive. I welcome the recent Sochi summit's fresh impetus to fully implement the Idlib memorandum, and I urge this to be a continued focus in the lead-up to the next Astana meeting. Meanwhile, the international community must ensure that the international norms against the use of chemical weapons are indeed respected and enforced. On another note, I would add the growing risk of further confrontations between Israel and Iran in Syria, and that this should not be overlooked. Mr. President, beyond crisis management, I note well that key international players express emphatic support for a political settlement for Syria under UN auspices and affirm Resolution 2254. They agree on the need to counter Security Council-listed groups and the need for peace and stability. They support a political settlement that meets the legitimate aspiration of the Syrian people and preserves Syria's sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity. They share an appreciation of the realities of 2019 and that real diplomacy is needed to address them. At present, different formats of discussions make contribution, and the United Nations has engaged judiciously with all who seek to help. But I believe there are real possibilities for strengthening international support, and I believe we need to be creative in this regard. I will be working hard in this direction. If we are to see how issues can be unblocked and how to help the parties move in the Syrian-led and Syrian-of process, a common forum where key states engage seriously on these issues may be needed. Mr. President, let me conclude. My engagements with all parties, without exception, have been positive and forward-looking. But of course, as we go deeper into the issues, the parties' willingness to move from good words to real talks will be put to the test. I will engage all in good faith with 5 goals in the period ahead. First, to begin and deepen a sustained dialogue with the Syrian government and the opposition on building trust and confidence towards a safe, calm, and neutral environment. Second, to see more concrete actions on detainees, abductees, and missing persons through engagement with the Astana players and the Syrian parties and all concerned. Third, to engage a wide range of Syrians as I proceed and to involve them in the process. Fourth, to convene a credible, balanced, and inclusive constitutional committee as soon as possible. Fifth, to help the international parties deepen their own dialogue towards the common purpose of a credible and sustainable political settlement of the Syrian conflict that can enjoy international legitimacy. Mr. President, if you allow me, one final thought. Syrians have every capacity to live together in peace, and a political settlement is plainly needed if we are to see real and genuine reconciliation. There is no military solution, and the true victors will be those who can move beyond slogans and paint a hopeful picture of what Syria could look like in 10 years, a picture that all Syrians can support, even if the road towards it will be long and hard. Mr. President, I spent much of my career working with problems that seemed totally intractable, dynamics that seemed eternally fixed. But I know firsthand that history can bend in the directions that nobody anticipated. Thank you.